Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. We're working on the book of Galatians. We're hung up on one word in Galatians chapter 5 right now, and the word is love. I like that word, and I like it in this context. We're on the list of things that are called the fruit of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Again, that's a good one to memorize. Cram that into your brain. Get a rhythm for it so it sticks. And there's there's 8 more things on this list after love, but we're spending the most time on love because it seems to be the central idea, the central challenge that binds up all the other things we've looked at in this long season on this little letter, the book of Galatians. And so we're in the midst of looking at what Paul said about love to try to get a sense of what that word means, because it's a word we could inflict a lot of our own meanings on. Now, after we've done that, we're looking at the stuff that Jesus says about love as recorded by the different gospel authors. We're in Luke chapter 10. We're about to look at maybe the most famous parable ever in the history of Bible parables. It's right up there, 1 or 2, probably. And before we do, here's a question. When I was a freshman in college, my philosophy professor in the very class where I met my wife, this was a philosophy professor who, by the way, hopped a train and hoboed to my wedding in Nebraska, where he read Robert Burns poetry at my very Norse, Scottish, Irish wedding, which is, it was pretty rad. And I will never forget, in that very formative freshman honors philosophy class, Professor Williams asked about the ring of power from The Lord of the Rings. I had not read The Lord of the Rings. I didn't know the story, so he had to explain it to me. And in that, he's saying, there's a ring in this story. And everybody else knew it, by the way, I look like an idiot for not knowing this. And the main character, you can put the ring on and you become invisible to those around you. So he posed the question, what if there was a ring that you could put on and you became morally invisible? Absolutely no accountability for what you did as long as you wore this magical ring of moral invisibility. And he asked us to reflect on how that would affect how we live and how we think and how we prioritize. Would we use the ring? And as someone who had won the Best Christian Award just 4 months earlier at my high school graduation from a Christian high school, they didn't call it Best Christian. I think they called it the Timothy Award. And also, I don't think I actually got the Timothy Award as I reflect on it because I was the best Christian. I think it was like a makeup call in sports, because there were only 9 people in my class and 8 of them made the homecoming court, and I was the one who didn't. I had to take pictures of my classmates for that. And I think maybe there was some lingering guilt to some of the teachers who were like, we might have over-taught him that lesson in humility. We should probably do something here to help him out. What if we made up some kind of Christian thing that we could, you're not good looking, but you're nice or something. Who's somebody who's young in the Bible who was not good looking but was nice? Anybody? Bible teacher? Timothy? We're going to call it the Timothy Award. And the winner shall be Matt Whitman, loser of the homecoming court. Give a speech. Keep it to under 60 seconds, please. So, I'm still riding pretty high coming off of that award that I got, feeling like I'm pretty good at being a Christian. And then a few months later, I go to this liberal college, Trinity College in Deerfield, Illinois, and I go to a liberal class, that philosophy, why do Christians need this malarkey? And now I'm getting asked questions about whether I would disobey God if I had a disobedience ring. No, I would have been the best because I am Mom's precious boy and I don't do bad things. So my answers were so dumb in that class. I remember the class very distinctly. I was like, I don't know. I think morality is something that, once it's internalized, I don't think any kind of ring would. No, such a ring would corrupt me. Of course it would corrupt me because it would just empower the flesh massively. Then the pride and the hubris that would come with that. Good heavens. I would like another run at that answer now. The point being, I think if we're honest about that, such a ring that would make us morally invisible, maybe even morally invisible to God, is the exercise, would not produce fruit in keeping with the spirit or the values of the kingdom. Come on. It would produce such an absurd metastasizing of all of the acts of the flesh. I mean, we would take that stuff to the next level. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you're better, but I think I would have got that wrong. Well, at a more modest level, that question is one that I'm posing to you right now. How much less good stuff would you do, fruit of the Spirit stuff would you do if nobody saw it? Well, maybe a lot of you are like, I don't know that anything would change. The Spirit thing, that's really taken hold of me. I don't know. Maybe others of you are like, yeah, the truth is, like you were talking about yesterday. Maybe some of it's a little performative. Maybe credit is kind of important to me when it comes to exhibiting the fruits of the Spirit. Maybe I'm the type that does need that positive affirmation, those pats on the back from time to time. But in Luke 10, with just a page earlier, the rejection by the Samaritans still lingering, and Jesus sent messengers up to a Samaritan village, and they were like, nah, we don't want anything to do with it. You're on the wrong side religiously, politically. Just keep on walking, Jesus. Not interested. James and John are all mad about it. That story is still ringing in our ears. And then one page over in Luke 10, Luke records this story of Jesus really taking us to a very thinky place regarding what love is. And interestingly, it all flows out of that same thing that we looked at in Mark 12, an incident where somebody asks Jesus, like, what's the most important thing? And it looks like that conversation happened a lot over the course of Jesus' life. People were really interested in that. Like, get to the bottom of it. What's the biggest thing? Looks like Jesus asked other people that at times. Looks like they asked Jesus that at times. Here's how it goes down in this spot, and really keep your ear out for the lack of performativeness in the character who gets it right in this story that Jesus tells. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Well, what's written in the law? He replied. How do you read it? He, that being the expert in the law, answers, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. If you read Mark, you already know in advance that that's a good answer. Let's see what happens next. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But the teacher of the law wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Remember the other day when I was making fun of philosophy guy, which was kind of making fun of me in the very philosophy class that I just told you about? This is exactly the tone I picture. I mean, I was expecting a fight. I'm a very good thinker. I'm a very, very smart teacher of the law. Here's a sophisticated question. Well, who is that? Who is my neighbor? Exactly. Gotcha, Jesus. In reply, Jesus said, this is Luke 10:30. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. And a priest happened to be going down that same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. The Samaritan went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. You can see why that parable is super, super famous and beloved, right? It strikes at all of our pride, all of our mutated, twisted up notions of love. It strikes at all of our self-importance. You got this notorious stretch of road where awful things happen. So everybody can kind of relate to, like, don't go to that part of town. Don't go to that part of the countryside. So it's just a great place for crime to happen. But thankfully, the religious people who love God came by. The poor man who got beaten, he's saved. It's a priest. He's always teaching people about what to do. Then the priest did, help. The priest, okay, bye. Well, the priest skips it. He can't. I mean, what if the guy's dead? Then the priest would be ritually unclean and he couldn't do church for a while. And that Levite, that's somebody who's helping out with temple things as well. So, okay, well, the priest had to go by. That's understandable. He's a very important man. He couldn't get ritually dirty. But here comes a Levite. It's a little more okay if he gets ritually dirty. Somebody else can just handle some of the temple assistant responsibilities. It's Levite. He's around metaphorical church all the time. He knows that God wants us to love people in need and what the right thing to do is. The man who got beaten is saved. It's a Levite. Well, crap. No, he's not, because this is the fruit that apparently their version of religion has created in this priest and in this Levite. That, by the way, was not a passing swipe at Judaism, but it was a passing swipe that Jesus is taking as well at this weird, twisted up version of ancient Judaism that didn't bear the fruit of love in any way. Well, this guy's still laying in the ditch. Well, who comes along? A Samaritan, a member of the people group who a page earlier completely rejected Jesus and said, well, we're not even going to hear you out. Don't come this direction. And that's the guy? His religion is wrong. His opinions are wrong. His politics are dangerously out of step with how things ought to be. Why, if Samaritans had their way, everything would go to garbage. And that's the guy who gets it right? Well, yeah, in the story that Jesus told, that's the guy who gets it right. And the fruit of love is on display. And furthermore, he kind of does it in the dark. Nobody sees this. An innkeeper who he's discreetly paying to take care of it. Dude's not out on a street corner thumping his chest about this. He's not tweeting about it. He just did what was loving in the situation. And somehow, a guy who was getting it wrong, and indeed, just, one book over in John, Jesus affirms to a Samaritan woman at the well, like, yeah, you guys are getting it wrong. But in this story, so what? Because whatever's going on with that Samaritan produces a non-performative, genuine, real love. The kind of love that if you had a ring that you could put on and it would make you morally invisible, you get the impression this guy would have done it anyway, because he kind of did. He sort of is morally invisible here. And yet this is what he did. And he went above and beyond. Or, it's Jesus' own terminology. He went the extra mile. So then Jesus points it back around to this expert in the law. And Jesus is like, all right, that's the story. Now it's coming right back at you. Which of these men do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Have you ever been backed into a situation like that where you're trying to be terribly smart in front of a lot of people to show how smart you are, and then someone who is just straight up better and more right is like, here's a question that there's only one obvious answer to. Do you want to look like an obstinate fool, or do you want to just bend the knee to truth here? And to his credit, the expert in the law, I put a begrudging tone on it. Maybe he didn't even take a begrudging tone. But to his credit, the expert in the law is like, yeah, it's a Samaritan. I don't like it. Maybe it was all he could do not to spit after he said the word Samaritan. And I don't know. But then Jesus' final instruction is so simple. Go and do likewise. What are we doing here, my friends? We're working through the question of what that one word, love, means in the larger context of the Bible. What does this mean as the first thing on the list of the fruit of the Spirit, the evidences of the Spirit, the outgrowth of the Spirit in the life of a Christian? Well, apparently love isn't just the long list of beautiful things that Paul gives us in the cross-stitch passage of 1 Corinthians 13. Apparently, it's not just love God with everything you got and love your neighbor as yourself. Apparently, that has implications. And love is more than performative. Love is more than for people who can give you something. Real love defies the transactional categories that tend to slip into it and pollute it. And real love defies doing it for cheap credit. There's a reason this passage is powerful. It took us a couple of days to get through the Good Samaritan stuff, but I, for one, have no regrets. All right, let's see what Jesus has to say about love in the final gospel, the Gospel of John. Mañana. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.
This podcast exists because many of you kick in to make it happen, even though you don't have to. Learn more at thetmbh.com/support. We're grateful because that supports our family.